My entire family dies at 23. And my birthday was coming up. I was standing in my aunt's kitchen during a family barbecue, balancing a paper plate loaded with potato salad, when my mom walked up and asked the question that made my entire body go rigid. "Are you excited to turn 23?" She said it so casually, like she was asking about the weather. I forced a smile and mumbled something about not being big on birthdays anymore, but inside, my stomach had dropped to my feet. You see, there's this thing in my family that nobody talks about directly, but everyone knows. Every generation, someone dies on their 23rd birthday. It started with my great-grandfather back in the 50s. Then it was my grandmother's sister. After that, my mom's cousin. I'm not naturally superstitious. I don't read horoscopes or avoid black cats. But when there's a pattern that's specific, that consistent, it's hard to ignore. And nobody, not one person in my family, had a rational explanation for it. We just accepted it as this dark cloud hanging over us. I spent the next 3 months trying not to think about it, but it was like trying not to think about a pink elephant. The date circled itself in my mind. I'd be walking to work and suddenly remember, oh right, I might die in 74 days. It sounds dramatic, but when you've grown up hearing whispers about the family curse, when you've watched your relatives go quiet at birthday parties, it gets under your skin. Then something happened that made everything feel more real. I was walking to work on a Tuesday morning, same route I always took, when a car suddenly jumped the curb about 15 feet ahead of me. I'd stopped to retie my shoe maybe 10 seconds earlier. If I hadn't stopped, if my shoelace hadn't come undone at that exact moment, I would have been standing right where that car mounted the sidewalk. The driver looked as shocked as I felt, claimed his brakes failed, but I stood there shaking for a solid 5 minutes after he drove away. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 2 in the morning, I was sitting in bed with my laptop, Googling our family history in a way I'd never done before. I started with the names I knew, cross-referencing obituaries and death certificates. What I found made my hands go numb. It wasn't just 3 deaths. I found 7. 7 family members, spread across 4 generations, who all died at exactly 23 years old. The causes varied: car accident, sudden illness, drowning, but the age was always the same. I knew I needed to talk to someone who remembered the older cases, someone who'd been around long enough to see the pattern. My great-aunt Helen was the only one left from that generation. She lived alone in a small house about 40 minutes away, the kind of place where the furniture hasn't moved in 30 years. I called her and said I wanted to visit, that I had some questions about family history. She sounded hesitant, but agreed. When I got there, we made small talk for maybe 10 minutes. She offered me tea, asked about my job, commented on how much I looked like my mother. But the second I brought up the deaths, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Her face went completely still, like someone had pressed pause. "Why are you digging into this?" she asked, and she wouldn't look directly at me. She kept her eyes fixed on her teacup. I told her the truth. My birthday was in a few months, and I needed to understand what was happening. She finally turned to look at me, and her face had gone pale in a way that scared me. "They all died between 3 and 4 in the afternoon," she whispered. "We stopped having birthday parties because of it. We'd have cake in the morning, sing happy birthday before noon. Anything to avoid that window of time." I pressed her for more information, but she shut down completely. Said she'd already said too much. Told me to leave it alone and pray. The closer my birthday got, the more paranoid I became. I stopped taking my usual routes to work. I checked my rearview mirror constantly. I researched freak accidents and random deaths, trying to understand what I should be afraid of. My friends thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. When the day finally came, I told everyone I wanted to spend it alone. I said I needed a mental health day, some time to myself. What I really did was deadbolt myself in my apartment and prepare to survive. I stocked up on food, so I wouldn't have to leave. I checked all the windows, made sure the smoke detectors worked, unplugged anything that could cause a fire. I probably looked insane, but I didn't care. The morning of my 23rd birthday, I sat on my couch watching the clock like it was a bomb timer. 10 a.m. came and went. Then noon. I'd barely eaten anything, just sipped water and watched the minutes tick by. By 2:30, I was actually starting to relax a little. I thought maybe I was being ridiculous. Maybe the curse was just confirmation bias, just a series of tragic coincidences that my family had turned into mythology. At 2:47, someone knocked on my door. My whole body tensed. I wasn't expecting anyone. I'd specifically told people not to visit. I figured it was probably just a delivery driver, maybe a package I'd forgotten about. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing there, maybe in his 40s, wearing a dark coat. Nothing obviously threatening, but something about his posture made me uneasy. "Who is it?" I called through the door. "I'm looking for Carolyn," he said. His voice was flat, completely emotionless, like he was reading from a script. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Wrong apartment," I said. "There's no Carolyn here." I started to move away from the door, but he knocked again, harder this time. "Please," he said. "I know she's in there. I need to speak with Carolyn." My hands were starting to sweat. Something was very wrong. I put the chain lock on and opened the door just a crack, just enough to see him more clearly. The moment he saw me, his jaw dropped. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. "Your eyes," he said, stepping closer. "You have Caroline's eyes." His right hand was in his coat pocket, and I could see the outline of something through the fabric. My brain was screaming at me to close the door. "You're going to tell me where Caroline is," he said, his voice harder now. I slammed the door so hard the wall shook. Immediately, he started pounding. Boom, boom, boom. The sound echoed through my apartment. "I know you're in there," he shouted. "I can wait. You have to come out eventually." I called 911 with shaking hands, barely able to hold my phone steady. I told the dispatcher someone was trying to break into my apartment, that I was scared, that I needed help immediately. Another slam, and I heard the chain lock start to rip out of the doorframe. The screws were coming loose, clattering to the floor. The pounding continued while I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, but the second we both heard sirens approaching, it stopped. Complete silence. When the police arrived, they found nothing. No fingerprints on the door. None of my neighbors had seen anyone in the hallway. They looked at me with that expression I recognized, the one that said they thought I was hysterical, maybe having some kind of episode. They took a report, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. I spent the rest of my birthday in that barricaded apartment, jumping at every sound, every footstep in the hallway. But nothing else happened. The sun went down. Midnight passed. I survived. For a while, I actually thought I'd broken the pattern. I thought maybe I was the one who'd ended whatever sick cycle this was. I stopped taking my anxiety medication after that, convinced it had made me paranoid, made me see threats that weren't really there. When my sister's 23rd birthday started approaching a year later, we actually laughed about how crazy I'd been. We planned a party. I told her the whole story about the man at my door, and we joked about my paranoia. She thought it was hilarious. I was in a meeting at work when my mom called. I usually let it go to voicemail during work hours, but something made me step out to answer. She was sobbing so hard I couldn't understand her at first. "Mom, slow down," I said. "What's wrong? Can you hear me?" "Your sister," she managed to say between sobs. "She collapsed at work. They said it was a brain aneurysm. She's gone." The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. "What do you mean gone?" "They pronounced her dead at 3:23 p.m. Mom's voice broke completely. "On her 23rd birthday." I don't remember much about the drive to the hospital, just that I kept gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands went numb. It couldn't be real. We'd just been planning her party. She'd just texted me that morning about what cake flavor she wanted. 24 years old and healthy. People don't just drop dead from brain aneurysms. At the funeral, none of my relatives would look me in the eye. It was like they were afraid, like acknowledging what happened would somehow make them next. My aunt pulled me aside after the service and told me something that made my blood run cold. My sister had been getting weird emails the week before she died. Someone asking about a person named Caroline, but she'd thought it was spam and deleted them. I instantly knew. It was supposed to be me. That man at my door had been looking for Caroline, and somehow they'd found my sister instead. A year passed. I barely remember most of it. I moved through my days like a ghost, going to work, coming home, checking the locks obsessively. On what would have been my sister's 24th birthday, I went to the cemetery at 3:23 in the afternoon. I don't know why. Maybe I thought being there at that exact time would help me feel closer to her. I was standing at her grave when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there was a woman standing about 10 feet away. She was maybe in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes. "You're the one who survived," she said. Not a question. I took a step back. "Who are you?" "I knew about the man at your door," she continued. "I know about Carolyn. I know everything." My heart was pounding. "I don't understand." She pulled out an old photograph from her pocket and handed it to me. It showed two young women, probably in their early 20s, standing in front of a diner. One of them was unmistakably my mother. Younger, with darker hair, but definitely her. The woman standing next to her looked like the woman in front of me now, just decades younger. On the back, someone had written in faded blue ink, Caroline and Luna, 1999. My legs felt weak. Caroline? That was your mother's real name, the woman said. Before she changed it 24 years ago. She was running from someone dangerous. Someone who wanted her dead for what she did to him. I sank down onto the grass, not caring that it was cold and damp. What are you talking about? The curse wasn't some family mystery, she said, sitting down beside me. It wasn't bad luck. It was a man who's been hunting your family for decades. He's been killing people at 23 because that's exactly how old your mother was when she testified against him and he went to prison. The pieces started falling into place, and I felt sick. My sister died because of something that happened before we were even born. I'm Luna Carver, she said. I was your mom's best friend back then. I'm the one who helped her disappear. I created the fake documents, found her a new town to live in, taught her how to become someone else completely. She pointed at the graves around us. The man at your door was probably Seth Robertson. He's a private investigator. The real threat is the person who hired him, the man your mother testified against. He's been tracking down family members who might lead back to Caroline. She showed me photos on her phone. A man with gray hair standing outside my apartment building. That's Seth, she said. He'd been following you for weeks before your birthday, learning your schedule, figuring out the best way to get to you. I left the cemetery immediately and drove straight to my mom's house. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely grip the wheel. The whole drive, I kept thinking about my sister. How she died for nothing. For someone else's past. For secrets she didn't even know existed. When I knocked on the door, Mom opened it, saw my face, and just knew. I held up the photo Luna had given me and watched her face go completely white. Where did you get that? She whispered. I pushed past her into the house. I know about Caroline. I know about everything. And you're going to tell me the truth. All of it. She started crying immediately, begging me to let it stay buried. She kept saying it was better if I didn't know, that knowing would only make things worse. But I wasn't leaving. Not after my sister died, because of her secrets. Mom finally sat down at the kitchen table and told me everything. When she was 23, she testified against a very dangerous man. She was the only witness brave enough to come forward after he killed 3 people, including her roommate. Her testimony sent him to prison for what was supposed to be life. And he swore in the courtroom that he'd kill her. Not just her, but any children she ever had. And he'd wait until they were 23, the same age she was when she betrayed him. When I asked his name, she shook her head. She grabbed a piece of paper from the drawer and wrote something down with a shaking hand. She showed it to me for maybe 2 seconds, then burned it over the sink. She said speaking his name out loud might somehow bring him closer, like he had people listening everywhere. She thought changing her name and moving across the country would be enough. She'd been so careful for so many years. Never posting photos online, never joining social media, always paying in cash. But somehow they'd found us anyway. And now my sister was dead, because of it. I suddenly understood why Grayton Helen had been so terrified when I asked about the family deaths. She knew Mom's real identity. She knew about Caroline. And that made her a target too. All those relatives who died at 23, they were the ones who knew the truth about where Caroline went. Someone had been systematically eliminating anyone who could reveal Mom's new identity over the years. Luna showed up at the house an hour later with a folder full of newspaper clippings. The headlines were from 1999, talking about a brutal triple murder and the brave young woman who testified. The man Mom testified against had been convicted, but he'd gotten out on a technicality after 15 years. Some evidence had been mishandled, and his expensive lawyers found a way to get the whole conviction thrown out. He'd walked out of prison 5 years ago with his fortune intact and started his revenge plan immediately. Luna explained that he'd been using his wealth to hire people like Seth Robertson. They'd find family members, follow them, learn about their children, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. The deaths in our family weren't coincidences. They were targeted hits, made to look natural. The car that jumped the curb when I was walking to work. The brain aneurysm that killed my sister. All of it had been planned. Mom broke down completely. She admitted she'd been getting threatening messages for months before my sister died. Anonymous emails with old photos of her as Caroline. Text messages from random numbers saying they knew where she lived. She thought if she ignored them and didn't engage, they'd give up and move on. She never imagined they'd go after us kids. She thought the threats were just meant to scare her into running again. But she was wrong. And now my sister was dead and I was supposed to be dead too. My whole body was shaking. I wanted to scream at her for keeping the secret, for not warning us, for letting my sister walk around not knowing she was in danger. My fists were clenched, so tight my nails dug into my palms. Luna stepped between us and put her hand on my shoulder. She told me that warning us might have actually made things worse. These people watch for any sign their targets know about them. Mom had gone to a security expert years ago who told her the best thing was to act normal, never let on that she knew about the threats. The expert said if she told us kids, we might panic or do something that would tip them off and make them strike faster. I pushed past Luna and grabbed Mom's laptop from the counter. I logged into my sister's Facebook account using the password she'd given me years ago. Luna leaned over my shoulder as I scrolled through her messages from the weeks before she died. There it was in her message requests. Someone named Marcus Henderson saying he was researching our family tree for a genealogy project. My sister had replied to him 3 weeks before her birthday. She'd sent him photos of our family reunions, told him about where we lived and worked. The profile picture was some random old man, but Luna said it was probably Seth Robertson using a fake account. Luna pulled out her own laptop and started showing me website after website where our information was just sitting there for anyone to buy. Property records showed Mom's address and how much she paid for the house. Voter registration had our full names and birthdays. Those people finder sites had our phone numbers, email addresses, even listed our relatives. Every time we updated our LinkedIn profiles or posted on Instagram, we were basically drawing them a map straight to us. Then Luna opened another folder, and my stomach dropped. She had medical reports from 3 other families connected to the original trial. Families where young people had died from sudden brain bleeding or organ failure. The symptoms matched what happened to my sister perfectly. There was this drug that could trigger bleeding in the brain if you had certain genes, and it broke down in the body so fast that normal toxicology tests wouldn't find it unless you knew exactly what to look for. My hands were shaking as I read about a girl in Ohio who'd collapsed at her job just like my sister. Another one in Texas who died during her birthday dinner. Luna had been tracking these deaths for years, building evidence that they weren't natural. We drove to the police station that afternoon with a box full of Luna's files. The detective listened to us for maybe 10 minutes before holding up his hand. He said without concrete proof of murder, without the actual drug in someone's system or video of someone poisoning them, there was nothing he could do. These were all just coincidences, as far as the law was concerned. He suggested we hire private security if we were really worried, and maybe think about moving somewhere else. Mom slammed her hand on his desk. She said she wasn't running anymore. She'd been running for 20 years, changing her name, never staying in one place too long. She was tired of being scared every time someone knocked on the door or a car drove by too slow. But even as she said it, I could see her hands shaking. Luna made a call from the parking lot, and 20 minutes later we were sitting in a coffee shop with a lawyer named Samuel Gates. He specialized in stalking cases and witness protection issues. He said he'd start working on restraining orders right away, but he was honest that they were basically just pieces of paper if someone was determined enough. A court order wasn't going to stop them. That night, my phone rang from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. For a few seconds, there was just breathing on the other end. Then a man's voice said 2 words before hanging up, "Caroline's daughter." My whole body went cold. They knew exactly who I was now. The next morning, a van pulled up and 2 guys started installing cameras on every corner of Mom's house. We changed all the locks to heavy duty, ones that couldn't be picked. The security company put sensors on every window and door. But even with all that, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. Samuel called us a week later with more bad news. He'd been digging into the financial side and discovered the man had been using cryptocurrency to pay people like Seth Robertson. The money moved through so many digital wallets that it was basically impossible to trace. There were no bank records to subpoena, no paper trail to follow. 3 days later, Mom took me to her bedroom closet and moved a pile of old sweaters to reveal a small safe I'd never seen before. Inside were stacks of cash wrapped in rubber bands. Maybe $30,000 total. She'd been putting it away for 15 years, 20 here and 50 there, preparing for the day she might have to run again. She pushed it toward me and told me to take it all and disappear before they found me too. But I pushed it back. I wasn't leaving her alone to face this. Luna came by the next morning with 3 bankers' boxes she'd been keeping in storage. She spread photos across Mom's dining table, and I felt sick looking at them. There was Seth Robertson at the grocery store 2 blocks from our house, 3 weeks before my sister died. Another photo showed him at the coffee shop where my sister went every morning. Luna had been following him for months, documenting everywhere he went. But when she'd taken everything to the police, they said photos of someone shopping weren't proof of anything illegal. She pulled out more files showing newspaper clippings from 3 other families who'd been connected to the original trial. The Hendersons in Michigan lost their daughter at 23 to a sudden heart attack, even though she was a marathon runner. The Washingtons in Georgia had their son die in a freak accident at work on his 23rd birthday. 2 families had already lost kids, and Luna said there was at least one more family out there still being hunted. I found the Henderson family on social media and sent them a message. The response came within an hour. We set up a video call that afternoon, and they told me they'd hired a company called Executive Protection Services. They'd been paying $8,000 a month for 2 years to have security check their house every day and follow their remaining kids to school and work. The dad had taken a second mortgage on their house, and the mom was working 3 jobs, but they said it was worth it because their other kids were still alive. Mom finally sat down with me and Luna that night and told us everything about the trial. Her roommate Jennifer had been dating this man who seemed charming at first, but got more controlling over time. When Jennifer tried to break up with him, he showed up at their apartment with a knife. Mom was hiding in the bedroom closet and heard everything. Heard Jennifer begging for her life. Heard the sounds that still gave her nightmares. When the police came, she was the only witness willing to testify because everyone else was too scared. Samuel called the next day saying he'd found something that might help us. If we could prove a pattern of ongoing harassment across state lines, it became a federal crime that the FBI would have to investigate. He set up a shared online folder where we started uploading everything, every weird phone call, every time we saw someone watching the house, every car that followed us. 2 days later, I opened my email and found a message with no subject line. The message had 12 photos of me taken from outside my apartment at different times over the past month. Me carrying groceries, me checking my mail, me leaving for work. The text just said 23 over and over again, filling the whole screen. Luna had been doing her own investigation and discovered Seth Robertson had been using the name Mike June to get a job at Quick Ship Delivery Service 6 months ago. The same company that delivered packages to our neighborhood every day. She'd followed him on his route and watched him slow down outside our houses, taking photos with his phone. We decided to confront him the next morning. Mom stayed in the car while Luna and I walked up to him as he was loading his truck. Luna said we knew who he really was and what he was doing. He stopped loading boxes and turned around with this calm smile, like he'd been expecting us. He said we couldn't prove anything, and even if we could, his employer was very patient. He told us we could watch our backs every second of every day, but eventually we'd make a mistake, forget to check the locks, and that's when they'd finish what they started. Luna was recording everything on her phone, but he didn't seem to care. He just got in his truck and drove away. That night around 2 in the morning, I heard glass breaking. I ran outside to find my car window smashed and a photo lying on the driver's seat. It was a picture of my sister's grave with fresh flowers on it. Flowers I hadn't put there. Someone had written on the back that they could get to us whenever they wanted. Mom spent the next 3 hours on the phone with the U.S. Marshal Service, trying to get back into witness protection. I sat next to her, listening to her voice get more and more desperate as they transferred her from office to office. They kept saying the same thing. Once you leave the program voluntarily, you can't come back unless there's a new credible threat that meets specific criteria. Harassment doesn't count. They needed proof someone was actively trying to kill her right now. Mom hung up and threw the phone across the room. Samuel suggested we hire someone to help us figure out how they kept finding us. He knew a researcher named Tristan Beck who specialized in genealogy and tracking down missing people. Tristan came to the house with 2 laptops and spent 4 hours going through our social media, public records, and data broker sites. Every time he found our information somewhere new, he'd explain how anyone with $50 could buy our addresses and phone numbers. He found something that made him stop typing. He pulled up a chart showing all the family members who died at 23 and started drawing lines between them. Every single one had been to Mom's wedding, or her baby shower, or some event where they would have heard her real name mentioned. They weren't random family members at all. They were the ones who knew about Caroline. Samuel called the next morning saying he'd gotten a judge to sign a restraining order against Seth Robertson. But when the cops went to serve it, his apartment was completely empty. Not just that he'd moved out, but like nobody had ever lived there. The landlord said Seth had paid 6 months' rent in cash up front. The neighbors couldn't even describe what he looked like. Luna drove by his fake job, and they said Mike June hadn't shown up for 3 days. 2 weeks later, my neighbor knocked on my door asking if I knew some woman who'd been asking about me. She was going door to door with a clipboard, pretending to do a survey about neighborhood safety. My neighbor thought it was weird because she kept asking specific questions about our family and when we were usually home. I decided I was done hiding. I wrote up everything that had happened and posted it on Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit. I named names, posted the photos they'd sent, included screenshots of the emails. Samuel called within an hour telling me to take it down, saying going public could make us bigger targets. But I refused. I was tired of being hunted in the dark. The post started getting shared, and within a day it had thousands of views. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with reporters. A local news station showed up at the house. Mom locked herself in a room and wouldn't come out. She kept saying the attention would make everything worse, but I thought maybe being in the spotlight would protect us. If everyone was watching, they couldn't just make us disappear. 3 days after the story went viral, I got a call from someone saying they were a federal prosecutor. They knew about the trial 20 years ago and the other families being targeted. They'd been building a RICO case against the man who wanted Mom dead, but they needed more evidence. Our situation might be exactly what they needed to finally put him away. We met with the prosecutor and 2 FBI agents at Samuel's office. They showed us files going back 30 years. He'd been suspected in dozens of crimes, but they could never get enough evidence. They said if we cooperated, they could offer us federal protection. We agreed immediately. The protection turned out to be an agent driving by the house twice a day and calling once a week. It was better than nothing, but I still couldn't sleep. A month later, I got an email from someone named Kayla Freeman. She said she was the nurse who'd been with my sister when she died. She'd been thinking about it ever since, and something didn't feel right. My sister had mentioned feeling dizzy for days before the aneurysm. She'd also told Kayla she kept seeing the same car following her to work. Kayla said my sister had seemed scared, but tried to laugh it off. We met at a coffee shop, and she pulled out a small cooler from her bag. Inside were 3 vials with my sister's name on them. She'd saved blood samples against hospital rules because the whole thing felt wrong to her. We took the samples to a private lab Luna knew about. 2 weeks later, the results came back, and I threw up when I read them. They found traces of a rare compound that can trigger aneurysms in people with certain genetic markers. It wasn't enough for a murder charge since we couldn't prove how it got in her system, but now we knew for sure that someone had poisoned my sister. I got myself tested the next day. I have the exact same genetic marker my sister had. The doctor explained that this compound would have killed me too if I'd been exposed. Luna said the only reason I survived was probably because Seth couldn't get close enough to dose me. My sister hadn't been so lucky because she'd been talking to him online, thinking he was family. Luna started making calls, and within a week she'd set up a meeting with other people whose families had been targeted. There were 12 of us in that first meeting, all survivors or family members of victims. We started meeting every week, sharing information, and watching out for each other. One of the survivors told us how she'd fought back. She'd hired a forensic accountant to dig into the man's finances and found multiple shell companies. She reported everything to the IRS and got several of his businesses audited. It didn't stop him completely, but it cost him millions and slowed him down. I found us a therapist who specialized in stalking victims. The first session, Mom just cried for the entire hour while I held her hand. The therapist gave us safety plans, varying our routes, checking our cars for trackers, setting up code words with trusted friends. She taught us breathing exercises for the panic attacks. Samuel called with bad news about the federal case. The witness, who was supposed to testify, had disappeared 3 days before the grand jury. Without that witness, the RICO case was weaker. I signed up for self-defense classes. I learned how to break holds, where to strike to disable someone, how to use everyday objects as weapons. I also got licensed to carry pepper spray. Through the support group, we found Mom's old witness protection handler. He'd retired to Florida 5 years ago. When we called him, he remembered Mom immediately. We flew down to meet him at a beach bar. He gave us a crash course in disappearing properly if things got worse. Burn all your credit cards. Never use your real name. Cut all contact with everyone from your old life. Get a burner phone and replace it every week. 3 days later, Luna called me at work. Seth Robertson had been arrested in Nevada on drug charges. The cops found meth in his car and warrants in 3 other states. Luna said he'd make bail, but it would take at least a week. I moved back in with Mom for safety. We spent days turning the house into a fortress. Security cameras on every corner. Heavy deadbolts on all the doors. Motion sensor lights for the whole yard. The alarm system cost $2,000, but Mom didn't care. Through the support group chat, We found out other families were doing the same thing. We pooled money for shared resources. The fund helped pay for security systems for families who couldn't afford them. A week later, I got an email from a journalist named Julia Richmond. She'd been investigating the original trial for a documentary and found disturbing patterns. She wanted to meet in person. We met at a busy coffee shop, and she showed me a folder full of death certificates. 7 people who were supposed to testify at the original trial had died before they could take the stand. Julia had been tracking down family members, and 3 of them said their relatives had mentioned getting threats. Samuel was excited about Julia's research. He filed paperwork suing the man for harassment, stalking, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The man's lawyers fought hard, but the judge allowed it to move forward because of the pattern Julia had documented. 3 weeks later, we had to do depositions. The man would appear by video from prison. Mom hadn't seen him in over 20 years, and she was shaking when we walked into the conference room. When the screen turned on and his face appeared, Mom made this sound like all the air left her body. He looked older, but his eyes were the same, cold and flat. He stared right at Mom and smiled. "Hello, Caroline," he said. Mom started crying. The deposition went on for 4 hours. But Mom answered every question clearly, describing the threats from decades ago and the fear she'd lived with. When it was over, Mom told Samuel she wanted to go public with everything. Julia was thrilled when we agreed to participate in her investigation. We spent 3 days at Julia's office going through everything. Mom recorded 8 hours of interviews, telling the whole story. Julia's article came out 2 weeks later on the front page of the Sunday paper. The headline read, "Decades of Death: How One Man's Revenge Destroyed Multiple Families." Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. 3 more families contacted Julia after reading it. The FBI agent called the next morning. The publicity had brought forward 2 witnesses who'd been too scared to talk before. One had recordings of phone calls where the man discussed having people killed. By that afternoon, federal agents had arrested him on RICO charges that could mean life in prison. But Luna warned us that his network was still active. Seth Robertson had made bail and disappeared. Some might want revenge for their boss going down. Samuel filed papers for the trial. Mom's hands shook when she signed the witness forms. The support group meetings moved to a community center when 40 more families joined after the newspaper article. Luna helped us file for nonprofit status. I went back to work but parked in different spots every day. Mom met someone named Jerome at the support group whose wife had been killed by her stalker 5 years ago. They started getting coffee after meetings, and I saw her smile for real for the first time since my sister died. The federal prosecutor called every week with updates. 3 months passed with us checking in daily. Mom and Jerome were going to dinner twice a week. The trial date got pushed back twice, but Samuel said that was normal. Our organization grew to 200 families, and we started a website with resources. Local news did a follow-up story showing how we were helping people, and donations started coming in. Mom told me Jerome made her feel safe again, and I was happy she'd found someone who understood what we'd been through. The trial finally started, and we sat in the courtroom watching them bring him in wearing shackles. Mom grabbed my hand when he looked at us, but she didn't look away this time. I testified for 3 hours about my birthday and what happened to my sister. Mom testified the next day and told them everything about being Caroline and running for 20 years. The jury took 2 days to come back with guilty verdicts on all charges. When the judge read life without parole, the man stared at Mom and mouthed Carolyn, but she just stared back without flinching. We organized a memorial for my sister on what would have been her 25th birthday. The whole family came this time, and we finally told everyone the truth about the curse and what really happened. My aunts and uncles cried when they heard how my sister died and why we'd kept it secret. We planted a tree in the park with a plaque that had her name and the date. Seth got arrested 2 weeks after the trial for trying to intimidate another witness. They put him in the same jail as his boss while he waited for his own trial. The guard found him hanging in his cell 3 days later with a bedsheet around his neck. Luna said someone probably killed him to keep him quiet about the network, but the cops called it suicide. Another person from the network got picked up in Texas trying to threaten one of the other families. Our support group kept meeting every week, and more people kept joining as word spread. Mom moved in with Jerome after 6 months and sold the house that had so many bad memories. I helped her pack up my sister's room, and we donated her clothes to charity. We kept her jewelry and photos but let go of everything else that hurt too much to see. My job let me work from home 3 days a week, so I didn't have to worry about my commute as much. I still checked mirrors and looked over my shoulder, but the fear wasn't as sharp anymore. Mom and Jerome got engaged on the one-year anniversary of the trial ending. The ring was simple, a small diamond on a gold band, and Mom cried when he proposed at the support group meeting. Everyone applauded. It felt like the first genuinely happy moment we'd had in years. Life wasn't normal and never would be. But we were building something better from what was left. Mom and I talked every day and went to therapy together once a month. We started a scholarship in my sister's name for nursing students, since that's what she'd wanted to be. The first recipient was a young woman who'd lost her own sister to violence. When she gave her acceptance speech at the ceremony, I had to leave the room because I was crying too hard. The organization helped 50 families get restraining orders and connected them with security companies. We set up a 24-hour hotline for people who felt like they were in immediate danger. 3 more people from his network got arrested when they tried to collect on old jobs they'd already been paid for. I dated someone for a few months, a guy I met at a coffee shop who had no idea about any of this at first. But when I finally told him the story, he couldn't handle it. He said he understood, but I could see the fear in his eyes every time we went out. He kept looking over his shoulder, kept asking if we were being followed. We broke up on a Tuesday night in his apartment. He said he cared about me, but couldn't live with the constant anxiety. I understood. I couldn't blame him for wanting a normal life. Mom understood when I told her. She said there was no rush to move forward faster than I was ready. "You've been through more than most people experience in a lifetime," she told me over coffee one morning. "Take your time. The right person will understand." We visited my sister's grave every month and told her about our lives, about how we were doing. I'd bring fresh flowers, always sunflowers, her favorite, and sit on the grass for an hour sometimes, just talking. I told her about the organization, about Mom's engagement, about the scholarship in her name. I told her I was sorry I hadn't protected her, even though I knew that wasn't rational. I told her I missed her every single day. The fear would always be there, but we learned to live around it instead of letting it control everything. Mom smiled more now and even laughed at Jerome's bad jokes sometimes. He made terrible puns about everything, the kind of jokes that make you groan and laugh at the same time. Mom would roll her eyes, but I'd catch her smiling afterward. We were closer than we'd ever been before, connected by survival and the promise to keep living for my sister. Mom told me once, late at night when we were both having trouble sleeping, that she thought my sister would be proud of what we'd built. She always wanted to help people, Mom said. In a way, she still is. I started volunteering with the organization more, helping new families navigate the same nightmare we'd been through. I'd sit with them in coffee shops or on video calls and tell them our story. I'd explain the security measures, the legal options, the emotional toll. And I'd tell them the most important thing: they weren't alone. One family I worked with had a daughter turning 23 in 2 months. The mother was terrified, barely sleeping, seeing threats everywhere. I recognized that fear. I'd lived it. I helped them install cameras, change their routines, document everything. And when her daughter's birthday came and went without incident, the mother called me crying with relief. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you for helping us survive this." Those moments made everything worth it. Every sleepless night, every panic attack, every time I still jumped at unexpected sounds, it all meant something if we could help even one family avoid what we'd been through. Luna became like a second mother to me. She'd check in every few days, sending articles about new privacy laws or security technology. She'd found her calling in protecting people, and she was good at it. She'd prevented at least 3 other deaths that we knew about, intercepting threats before they could be carried out. Samuel kept fighting legal battles for families in our group. He'd taken on several cases pro bono, saying that some fights were about more than money. He helped us shut down 2 data broker sites that refused to remove people's information. He got restraining orders against 4 more people connected to the network. Julia's documentary came out 18 months after the trial. It was called The 23-Year Curse, and it traced our family's story alongside 3 others. Mom and I watched it together in her new living room, holding hands through the difficult parts. Seeing my sister's face on screen, hearing her voice in old home videos, it broke something open in me that I'd been keeping locked away. The documentary won awards. It sparked conversations about witness protection reform, about the need for better laws around stalking and harassment. Politicians started talking about the issues. 3 states passed new legislation making it easier to prosecute stalkers who operated across state lines. But beyond all the recognition and change, the most important thing was that we'd survived. We'd taken something horrible and used it to protect others. My sister's death hadn't been meaningless. It had exposed a monster and saved lives. On the second anniversary of my sister's death, we held a vigil at the cemetery. Over 100 people showed up, families we'd helped, people from the support group, friends and relatives who finally understood what had really happened. We lit candles and shared stories. Mom talked about my sister's kindness, her laugh, her dreams of becoming a nurse. I stood up and said that my sister had been taken from us by someone else's hatred, but she'd left behind something stronger, a community of survivors who refused to be victims anymore. We would keep her memory alive by protecting others. We would turn our pain into purpose. As the sun set and the candles flickered in the evening breeze, I felt something shift inside me. The guilt I'd been carrying, the feeling that I should have done more, should have protected her somehow, began to ease. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose what came next. Mom squeezed my hand. "She'd be so proud of you," she whispered. Maybe she was right. Maybe somewhere, my sister knew that her death hadn't been in vain, that we'd built something meaningful from the ashes of our grief. I still have bad days. Days when I can't stop checking the locks, when every car that slows down makes my heart race, when the weight of everything feels too heavy to carry. On those days, I call Mom or Luna or someone from the support group. I remind myself that I'm not alone in this. And on good days, I can actually imagine a future. Maybe one day I'll be ready to try dating again. Maybe I'll move out of the state, start completely fresh somewhere new. Maybe I'll write a book about everything that happened, help even more people understand what it's like to be hunted. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time. I'm learning that healing isn't linear, that some scars never fully fade. But I'm also learning that survival is its own kind of victory. Every morning I wake up, every night I go to sleep safe in my bed. Those are acts of defiance against the man who tried to destroy our family. Mom and Jerome got married in a small ceremony 6 months ago. I was her maid of honor. She wore a simple white dress and smiled more that day than I'd seen in years. When Jerome said his vows, he promised to protect her and honor my sister's memory. He promised to be part of our fight, to stand with us no matter what came next. The organization continues to grow. We're up to 400 families now, with chapters in 15 states. We've helped get 7 more people from the network arrested and convicted. We've saved at least 12 lives that we know about, people who were being stalked, who received our warning signs flyer, who reached out for help before it was too late. I turned 25 last month. I spent the day at the cemetery, then had dinner with Mom and Jerome. No big celebration, just the 3 of us and Luna, sharing stories and remembering. At 3:23 in the afternoon, we all fell silent for a minute, remembering my sister, honoring her memory. That night, I stood on Mom's back porch looking up at the stars. I thought about everything we'd been through, everything we'd lost, everything we'd built. And I made a promise to my sister, wherever she was. I promised to keep fighting, to keep helping families like ours, to make sure no one else died at 23 because of some monster's revenge. I promised to live fully, to not waste the years she never got to have, to find joy where I could and purpose in the pain. The fear will always be part of me now. It's woven into who I am, inseparable from my story. But it doesn't define me anymore. I define myself by how I've chosen to respond, by the lives we've saved, by the community we've built. My sister died at 23, and I survived. And every day I wake up and choose to make that survival mean something. That's my legacy. That's our legacy. And nothing, not the memories, not the fear, not the ongoing threats from whatever remains of his network, can take that away from us. We are survivors. We are fighters. We are the ones who broke the curse and turned it into a mission. And we're not done yet.
New stories every day. You know where to find me.